Welcome to part 2 of Controlling 101. You'll continue to learn basic information needed to perform the controller role. Part 2 will cover debuffs, control effects, skill points, and R&D modding. Debuffing is a unique mechanic for controllers. It allows us to reduce our enemy's effectiveness. All the controller power sets can apply 3 types of debuffs. That consists of a defense, healing, and damage debuff. A debuff lasts for 10 seconds and will only register on one target. Each time you reapply it, you simply restart the 10-second timer with no negative effects. This relates to each type of debuff. Starting with the defense debuff, it lowers an NPC's defense stat by 33%, which also reduces their damage mitigation from 15% to 10% for 10 seconds. Nearly all NPCs mitigate 15% damage, which is the standard. We essentially pierce 5% of their armor. The red shield icon underneath an enemy's name tag is indicative of the defense debuff being active. In PvP, it will remove 3,797 toughness from a player. With all members in a group focus firing the same defense debuff target, look at this as a minor group buff. By preventing an NPC from mitigating the standard 15% damage done by us and toning it down to 10%, think of that additional damage as if a lesser equipped DPS player was there. Although it is minor, the fact remains that it is still additional damage being registered on the NPC. Because everyone ultimately wants more burn, this is your most requested debuff. If you have mastered being able to keep yourself powered, this debuff should always be up on any target. This debuff will become useful on NPCs that gain a significant defense or mitigation buff. The defense debuffs for the power sets are Gauss Grenade and Stasis Field for gadgets, Phantom Flames and Thought Bubble for mental, Light Blast and Whip Thrash for light, Time Shift and Singularity for quantum, and Smoke Grenade Launcher and 5-barrel minigun for munitions. The healing debuff in both PvE and PvP reduces an enemy's ability to receive heals by 25%. So once your target has this debuff, all heals coming into that target from themselves or their allies will be reduced by 25%. The red heart icon underneath an enemy's name tag indicates the healing debuff being active. If you want to prevent an enemy from healing at full capacity, your best bet is to heal debuff the target doing the healing, then eliminate it. Ultimately, if you're running with strong DPS, or you just overgear the content, you won't really need this debuff. Some example of NPCs that can heal and receive heals include the Zeta Drone and Inner Sanctum. Just cast the debuff on it, and when the OMAC nano repair units appear, take them out. Brainiac and the other Prime Avatar bosses like Tech Meta and Magic and Prime Battleground the Raid receive heals from healer drones, so apply the debuff on the bosses and dispatch the healer drones. The Paradox Ravager boss receives heals from minor Paradox Fountains in Paradox Wave Raid, so debuff the Ravager and eliminate the fountains. The healing debuffs for the controller power sets are Cryo Foam and Napalm Grenade for gadgets, Pyrokinesis and Horrific Visage for mental, Snap Trap and Entrap for light, Anomaly and Gravity Bomb for quantum, and Multinet Launcher and Rocket Launcher for munitions. Moving on to the damage debuff, it decreases an NPC's total damage output by 7%. Again, it's total damage. The red crosshair icon underneath an enemy's name tag indicates a damage debuff being active. In PvP, it removes a damager's damage modifier buff and also reduces 7% of their total damage. The user interface does not tell you all the details, which is why the developers often refer to the icons underneath name tags as check engine lights. On some NPCs, they gain a green buff icon underneath their name tag during combat, but that identifies them as entering a different phase of a fight while gaining a small buff. It is as of September 2015 that the developers started adding major buffs for damage on NPCs, and have introduced the ability for controllers to now remove those significant damage buffs on certain bosses. That was shared with me by developer Jack Frost. Examples include Desecrated Cathedral, Normal and Elite, specifically during the James boss fight. Keep an eye on James's hands and name tag. You'll see the green buff icon appear underneath his name tag, but you'll also see a yellow and black smoky aura animation around his hands in sync with the green buff. That indicates his damage buff is active. Just cast a damage debuff and the aura on his hands will disappear and the green buff icon will turn red. Another current example of this is in the normal and elite version of Prison Break, the raid, on Dr. Light, the last boss. Just look for the green icon underneath his name tag along with a black and white smoky aura animation around his hands. Just like with James in the Cathedral alert, just cast the damage debuff and the aura will disappear along with the green icon turning red. Developer Jack Frost has mentioned to me in a private message that, quote, you may see more bosses in the future with similar mechanics, end quote. So going forward into new content, look for the green damage buff icon and make sure you look for a prominent animation that's in sync with that icon. That more than likely means it's a damage buff. Your damage debuff will remove that damage increase from that boss as well as apply the normal 7% reduction in damage. Have shields ready and coordinate with your healer if they have 4-man group shields, and you can further reduce damage taken in. The damage debuffs for the controller power sets are Paralyzing Dart and Vortex Cannon for gadgets, Cryokinesis and Terrorize for mental, Grasping Hand and Lightweight for light, Warp Barrage and Alcubierre Wave for quantum, and Flat Cannon and Mini Nuke for munitions. Before I actually get into investing your skill points in R&D modding, I'll go over the stats that are important to controllers. The primary stat you need to associate with the role is Vitalization. That's because it alone is responsible for the amount of power you restore to yourself through your weapon hit combo meter. It also determines how much power you and your teammates will receive via your power over time tick, your instant power heal, and your power heal supercharge. Preceding this stat is Dominance. Dominance does 4 things for us. 1, it is half of the formula that determines the strength of our shields. 2, it's the other half of the equation that determines the amount we can heal ourselves for when we use our own powers that provide heals. 3, it determines whether your powers and weapon attacks will apply a control effect on NPCs with high willpower. For the record, willpower is an invisible stat that NPCs have that allows them to resist our control effects, with the exception of broken effects on some powers like Nature's Harvest. Once you meet or slightly surpass the suggested amount of dominance located in the queue up menu for an instance, you have enough to break their willpower and you can control them. And 4, every 500 points of dominance will increase the duration of a stun, a root, levitation, or encasement effect by 1 second, or 2 milliseconds every 1 point of dom. Only the control effects I just mentioned. This only applies to them. So again, for dominance, once your character has reached or slightly surpassed the suggested amount of dominance for the most recent content, you will be able to physically control your enemies in all content that has controllable NPCs. And you no longer need to spec into dominance, unless you're trying to improve the strength of your shields. Other stat mentions include power to increase your power pool, but if you have mastered weapon power regen, you'll constantly have a flow of incoming power. Health obviously increases your health pool. Precision is a logical offensive stat to spec into, given that as you regen via weapon hit combos, you also inflict damage by default. Might would work if your pot or debuffs or favorite CC powers apply a damage over time power, or if you just want to increase the strength of your burst damage. Although it's not priority, restoration is another stat, and it is half of the formula that determines the amount of heals you inflict with your powers. And it's half of the formula that determines the strength of your shields. Both Restoration and Dom are partners here. Resto also gives you slightly more stats than Dominance, even when Dominance is doubled in controller stance. So now we can cover skill points. I recommend you aim for the critical innates first. In all of the trees you have power heal critical chance. What that does is, it increases the possibility of you actually critting. Crits generally give more power depending if you have a high magnitude. So, the more you crit, the more power you give out, as opposed to having a flat consistent number. You're going to look for dominance, vitalization, and power in the first tier in all of the trees. And to the right of the label, you want to make sure it says power heal crit. Next, put 3 skill points in these slots to unlock power heal crit chance. It must be 3 skill points, not 1, not 2, but 3. Doing so increases your chance to crit permanently by 1%. Now go into the rest of the trees and unlock them all. Towards the end, you should have increased your power heal crit chance by 11%, while also benefiting from an increase in your Dom, Vite, and Power by default. Once you have all your power crit innates from tier 1, you may then spec into vitalization in the second tiers of the trees as you make your way to unlocking the Vite and Power at the bottom tier. Quick info on the tiers. Tier 1 grants a total of 30 Vite, and that's 10 Vite per point, requiring 3 skill points. That's the one that gives you the power heal crit chance. Tier 2 gives a total of 24 Vite, but that requires 6 skill points. And Tier 3 gives a total of 24 Vite as well, but that requires 3 skill points, and it also gives you a total of 75 power. So just go down the trees, get the crit, then get the Vite, Dom, Health, Power, or Precision, and it's really your preference at this point. Just make sure you invest 21 skill points to unlock the Tier 3, the innates at the bottom. You don't have to put in a skill point into unlocking Weapon Mastery in all of the tiers to unlock the bottom tier. You just need to invest 21 skill points. Now move on to the next weapon tree. Just to further clarify, you do need to put skill points into the 2 weapon trees you plan on unlocking Weapon Mastery for your combos. For example, if you're going to use Brawling into Shuriken Storm, you just need to unlock Weapon Mastery for Brawling and Martial Arts. But again, you don't need to unlock Weapon Mastery in all of the other weapon trees. If you're short on skill points and you want to prioritize vitalization from tier 1, aim for these weapons. Dual pistols, one hand, rifle, and two hand. Just go straight down there and unlock Vite. It's at tier 1. Next, if you want to go for dominance, the weapons that have dominance are brawling, dual wield, hand blasters, and staff at tier 1. And then lastly, the weapons that have power in tier 1 are bow, martial arts, and shield. Another note, you can also place power points in the iconic tree to get an extra 75 vitalization and 125 power in Wisdom of Solomon. There's also Intimidating Gaze that gives 40 dominance, but this becomes 80 in Controller Stance. You also have the option to gain 200 health and increase your damage with Weapons Expert and Tactical Genius, which benefit your attack critical innates as you use your weapon to regen, pot, debuffs, and powers to control that deal damage anyway. If you have an extra skill point, look into the movement tree. You may also want to unlock Stun Resistance, which gives a permanent 10% stun resistance, and Restraint Resistant, which gives a 10% encase and root resistance. Just below that, you have recoveries, which allow you to recover some power after you've broken out of stuns or roots and encases. Research and development mods is next on the list. We've already covered stats, so at this point, the same reasoning we had for favoring something like power, Vite, precision, health, and so on for skill points can be applied to creating your R&D mods. Hopefully you already understand how the R&D system works so that I don't have to cover it. If you do not, then ask about it in the comments section or in my DCUO forums thread. Similar to pursuing the critical innates for skill points, you want to make sure you're modding correctly to unlock the critical innates in the gear you've acquired. There are 2 critical power bonuses found there. First, you have 2.5% critical power chance in both leg and head gear. Crit power chance is what we covered already when we spoke about skill point specs. Remember, it increases the possibility of you giving a crit power heal. Now, we have something called a critical power magnitude, which just increases the actual amount of power your crit gives. So remember, chance increases the odds of seeing a crit, and magnitude increases how much power is in that crit. 10% critical power magnitude is located in both chest and shoulder gear. So now quickly, let's go over the crit totals for properly modding your gear. You'll get 20% crit power magnitude and 5% crit power chance. Again, those are totals. This is added onto your base stats of 5% crit power chance. Base just means without you doing anything to your skill points or your gear. So in total, with 11% crit power chance unlocked in skill points, and now with properly modding your gear, you'll have a total of 19% crit power chance as your affinity bonus. A few tests were done in the past and are located in the DCUO forums that prove you do in fact produce more power out when you mod correctly to unlock these bonuses. Make sure you're modding using the correct stats associated with the right colors to turn on these affinity bonuses. Remember, chest and legs need red or red mixed mods, and Head and Shoulders need blue or blue mixed mods. The remaining slots, which include the back, hands, waist, feet, and both rings, are yellow colored slots. Plans for vitalization are yellow, so pure Vite can go in these slots, or you can dual mod with Vite and other stats to benefit your playstyle. Vite in Power, Vite in Precision, Vite in Health, and Vite in Dom all work out. Just a note, there are small amounts of Vite in the waist and back. Currently in T8 stats, modding pure Vite will boost your pot tick around 9, which is around 120 something Vite, maybe 126. I want to emphasize that at no point in the game's history did modding pure Vite increase your pot tick to a point where it was absolutely necessary to mod that way. Going forward, it's more than likely that will not change. The reason I mentioned that in a basics video is because you as a player truly have the freedom to customize your stats. It will always be players who do not 100% understand the controller mechanics and stats that will tell you pure Vite and strict emphasis on Vite is what you must aim for. The gear alone and just dual modding with Vite is sufficient to perform the role even in elite and challenging content. Of course, I'll cover more of this in my 102 series. The takeaway from this is that you definitely have the option to customize how you want to mod your gear while still being able to power a team. What you'll have to look at if you question your R&D modding preference is whether you know how to power a team using just the controller mechanics and trinkets. These are tips covered in my 102 series, which will show you that you do not need to heavily rely on just Vite. If you question your modding approach in content, look for mechanics from bosses or NPCs that drain power or block power heals. Look at whether you're playing with power spammers, which you can mathematically prove on paper and in gameplay are just no good spammers. This concludes part 2 of the Controller 101 video. I had to extend the project to 3 parts because of the details you need to know for control effects, which is very important. So keep an eye out for part 3, which will be the final video for the 101 series.